In the last video, we saw some ideas of how life may have originated on the planet. We saw firm evidence that life has been around for at least 3.5 billion years, and that after the evolution of basic prokaryotes, we had the evolution of photosynthesis, which changed the planet dramatically, leading to an oxygen-rich environment. Now, those critters that we have today, those prokaryotes, tend to fall in a few categories in terms of body shape and things and how they live. Now, there's more diversity than this, but this is the common shapes you'll see and the common lifestyles you'll see. So most prokaryotes are unicellular, but some of them live together in colonies, which that's not really, they're not multicellular beings at that point, but some of them live together in like big clumps, which is sort of like the beginning of multicellularity. Most of these prokaryote cells are very small, 0.5 to 5 microns in diameter, which is much smaller than eukaryotic cells, which are usually like 10 to 100, average size being around 50 microns in diameter. So they're quite a bit smaller than your eukaryotic cell. And they have a variety of shapes. Some of the more common shapes are spheres, cocci, or cocci. You may have heard of some bacterial names that have these shapes in their name. Bacilli is rod-shaped and spiral. So you may have heard of like Bacillus thuringiensis. It's a bacteria that has rod-shaped. Or Streptococcus. That's a strep bacteria that has a round shape. Or spiro whatever. You'll hear that name in those terms in a lot of the names of bacteria. Now, bacteria are everywhere. And just to give you an idea, it's thought that there's something like, I don't remember, many times more bacterial cells on you and in you than human cells. Because they're smaller than you, so they outnumber you, which is really strange to think about. You're like a planet to these bacteria. And in a recent study, someone went into a subway and they swabbed the subway for human bacteria to see what they could find. So bear in mind, they can live all over the place. Prokaryotes live everywhere, in you, on you, around you, hot and dry places, salty places. And they're very small, but they're very common in number and diversity. And when they did that swab of the subway, they found, you can look at this chart here, 20% of the bacteria they found were from the urogenital tract. So like people's crotches and butts and stuff like that. So people didn't wash their hands and they got on the subway and they spread germs everywhere. 32% were from the gastrointestinal tract. Once again, that's probably from human waste being spread around. 29% from skin bacteria. That's not surprising. 6% mouth bacteria. 1.6% from people's eyes. So that's just strange. And 48% of the genetic material they found was from unknown, undiscovered organisms. Isn't that crazy? Anyway, so this is why we need to wash our hands when we touch things. So there's human bacteria from people's urogenital tract and their digestive tract everywhere. And it can make us sick when it gets into our bodies. Now, a common way when we look at, I'm going to talk about bacteria specifically here, not archaea. A common way that you'll learn if you take micro to distinguish between different kinds of bacteria is gram staining. Gram staining is a way to make different categories of bacteria stain differently so you can identify them under a microscope. So gram-positive bacteria have a cell that looks like this. So they have a phospholipid bilayer, just like we do, and then they have a cell wall outside of that of that cell membrane made of a protein called peptidoglycan. Okay, and that peptidoglycan holds on to stain really well. So when you stain them, you can see them as like a purple color under the microscope. Now, some bacteria are what we call gram-negative bacteria. They have a very thin peptidoglycan layer. So let me show you how their cell wall works. They have a phospholipid layer like we do. Then they have a thin peptidoglycan layer. And then they have another phospholipid layer, which is part of the cell wall. So they have like 2 phospholipid bilayers between a sandwich of peptidoglycan there. And they don't hold onto that gram stain very well because of this extra layer of membrane and the much thinner peptidoglycan layer. So they only look kind of like pinkish under the microscope. And these gram-negative bacteria are often a little more toxic. Their outer membrane can be toxic to us, can make us sick. They're often a little bit more antibiotic resistant because they have extra barriers between their insides and the antibiotic. So many antibiotics actually target the peptidoglycan layer to damage it. Therefore, a lot of gram-negative bacteria are a little harder to kill with antibiotics. So if you take any medical classes, you're going to have to learn to tell the difference between those 2 kinds of bacteria because it may affect what kind of treatment you give a patient. Now, another thing we'll find on bacteria is a polysaccharide or protein layer called a capsule. It's like a slimy outer layer around the bacterial wall, and it can actually act like Velcro, like holding bacteria in this, like this bacterium here, to like a tonsil cell. It allows them to stick, and it can also let them stick to each other. In fact, a lot of bacteria, as we said, form colonies, and like dental plaque is basically a whole bunch of different bacteria that secrete a sticky biofilm, and that's why your teeth feel kind of like there's something on them when they're covered in plaque. It's that biofilm of bacteria and their outer secretions, that layer like we see here, this capsule that allows them to stick to your teeth and then slowly dissolve them. We also see the same kind of thing in creeks, where we have biofilms, which is a bunch of bacteria held together with that secretion, you know, that capsule essentially, and you might feel it as a very slimy layer on a rock in a stream. So these occur all over the place where bacteria are living together and secreting kind of a protective outer covering. If we look at the rest of the bacteria, we'll see once again they can have that capsule, they can have a peptidoglycan layer and a plasma membrane, but then they have their cytosol, the liquid, just like we have. And the other things I want to focus on here is they have their DNA in the form of a nucleoid, which is a round ring-like chromosome that's all folded up. It's not a nucleus because it's not surrounded by a membrane, but they have a nucleoid, and they also have other bits of DNA in here called plasmids, these rings of DNA, okay? And they can have flagella to swim around, and they can also have these hair-like structures called pili, which they can use to transfer plasmids from one bacterium to another. But some of the important things to note, you know, I'm just going to use my mouse here. I don't have a pen hooked up right now. But you have your outer layer, which would be your plasma membrane and your cell wall and all that. And then you're going to have DNA inside, which is a nucleoid. And you're going to have ribosomes in here. Okay, there's ribosomes in here. I'm going to try to write with a mouse. I'm just going to write ribo for ribosomes. There's DNA in here in the form of a nucleoid, right? And those are some of the major things inside of the bacteria here. And also we have sticking off of here the pili. And those pili can, like I said, can be used to help transfer genetic material from one bacterium to another. Okay. So if we look at the diversity of these things we call prokaryotes. Here's the eukaryotes, which include us, right? These 2 groups here are the prokaryotes. Once again, they're not really a clade. Here's the universal ancestor of life. But we have domain archaea and domain bacteria here within this group. So domain archaea, a more recently discovered group. Lots of diversity there. They live in extreme environments, a lot of them do. Some of them are in our gut, things like that. We have domain bacteria, which include the gram-positive bacteria and lots of different other bacteria that are gram-negative, including the protobacteria, which we'll mention a few of those here in just a little bit. So what we'll do is we'll talk about what some of the bacteria do in the environment and what kind of role they play and how they affect some of our health as human beings. Some bacteria are vital. They help us make and absorb vitamins. They help us digest food. They help us defend ourselves from other bacteria. But of course, the bacteria that we hear about most are the ones that cause disease.